today with everyone. So we certainly want to make sure that we have all of the 60 minutes for the information that we want to provide for you. For those that are just now tuning in, make sure that you check the chat. Joan has put in the sketchy form for those that need the sketchies. We welcome you and excited to be here with my colleague, Joan Hawkshurst, who we have been collaborating together for all of these power hours. Some of you have registered from the start and have been with us all along. Others are just joining us, but we want to make sure you know that all of them are recorded, and we have a YouTube playlist of all of the recorded power hours, including this one. It'll be up shortly after the day today, and we just encourage you to look back through those, even if you were with us during them. Sometimes you can still glean some information. So for today, we are looking at the culture of career development and assessing ways to assess the culture of career development within your school. And so we want to do a quick review because it's been a while. We haven't been together since November. November was our last power hour. So I'm going to have Joan advance the slide one more to what we're looking at, the review. And in doing so, we want to just a little bit of recapping of what is it? What is the definition of the culture of career development? And I'm not going to read through this entire definition because we're going to be circling back to some of the components as we go through our power hour today. But this is one that we covered in our September power hour. So again, that's something that you can look back on if you get into the YouTube channel and see our recordings. And we'll provide a link for that in a little bit as well. So one of the things we want to make sure that we talk about is that in review, all of our power hours this year have been built on the foundation that the Michigan Career Development Model framework is now delivering. It came out in 2025, late 2025. And so we started some of our power hours last year around the model. And then this year we've really been diving into a lot of the learning targets of the model. And within the model, if you don't have a copy, you can click on the graphic on this slide deck to get your own copy. And within the model, it states that the Michigan Career Development Model is a framework guided by legislation that engages school communities, students, and their support networks in intentional and meaningful career awareness, exploration, and preparation for all students. And that terminology is something that we did weave into our definition of the culture of career development. So we also have shared previously our framework, our career development framework for the Michigan Career Development Learning Targets. This framework is not in the guide. It is something that Joan actually created here at KRESA as we started to look at the learning targets and how they built upon each other. So you can now glance at the titles of each of the learning targets and see how they build from early childhood to post-secondary. And also you can see at a glance which ones are recommended versus which ones are legislatively required. You can also click on this graphic if you don't have your own version and be able to print a copy. So we've looked also at the process of career development. Often it's shown as a cycle rather than a straight line because it's highlighting the fact that career development it's not a one and done. It's a lifelong journey. So the one shown here on this slide is the Michigan Career Development Model version. And we know that individuals as well as institutions of learning, even employer organizations might have a career development model that is that's in existence in their building. So they can learn and follow the cycle anytime there's a career transition occurring. One of the final things that we reviewed and that we've gone over previously, and that's going to be part of some of our components today, is how MICIP is now being aligned to, or how the Michigan Career Development Model, there was some collaborative work that was done with MICIP so that we can see how district school improvement teams can write in their career development goals and bring them to life. And so within MICIP now is information in regards to career development, building a career development culture. And so as you can see here, here's one example of what's in MICIP. We know there's various templates that's within MICIP that different schools can use and work from in terms of their school improvement plan and goals. And so we're learning from early and continued research that when student interests are incorporated into school programs, there's a significant relationship to their academic success in the form of improvement. It's a positive academic success rate when we can incorporate those pieces together. So we now there is some information within MICIP that relates to the career development culture within schools.
Great. So as you can tell in earlier Power Hours, as Liz has shared today, let me make sure you get that. We've already introduced a lot of the how assessment can be done, and we're going to dive back into that much deeper today. But first, we wanted to take just a few minutes to think about the why we want to assess career development culture in our buildings and districts. So the word assess comes from the Latin word assidere, which means to sit beside. And if we take this definition of assessment to heart, we begin to see it as an opportunity to glean information about what students know and what they're able to do so that we as educators can facilitate and guide their next steps. In general, there are different lenses for doing cultural assessment. And cultural assessments are not one size fits all. So you can choose from different formats depending on what your goals are, what you want to measure, and how deeply you want to explore cultural dynamics. Each type of assessment offers different and unique insights into values, behaviors, and alignment. So as you can see here, one might think about assessing career development culture through quantitative assessments like surveys and pulse checks. One might think about doing a qualitative assessment where you use interviews, focus groups, and open-ended feedback sessions. And that's a good way to sort of capture some nuance, some stories, and the lived experiences of your students, staff, families, and community partners. There are also framework-based assessments, models that categorize cultures and compare current versus ideal states of culture. And then there are 360-degree cultural feedback assessments, which collect perspectives at different levels so you can understand how cultural norms are experienced at multiple levels. So why assess career development culture? We want to assess it for 3 reasons. 1, to know if we're meeting our goals. 2, to know if our students are ready for life after graduation. And 3, to make our career development programs, K-12, even better. So now let's go back to our definition of career development culture and break it down into components that are accessible. So this is the definition we shared in September. Liz shared it early on, and here are the pieces we want to look at today. Does our culture engage students, families, and communities? Does it integrate career exploration, awareness, preparation, and readiness into all aspects of learning? Does it embed self-awareness and option awareness within the curriculum? Does our culture leverage labor market data? Does it provide personalized guidance and mentorship? Does it foster essential skills like critical thinking and problem solving? And if all that happens, then we should be able to assess whether all students have pathways to success beyond graduation. So Liz reminded us of the MICIP and the process guide a few minutes ago, and we thought we'd spend just a few minutes digging deeper into some of the questions that are listed in the process guide and consider them as they relate to your own career development culture. So the questions on these two slides are selected from the process guide with an eye toward assessment of career development culture. We'll go through them quickly, but the reason we wanted you to have the slide deck up front, and I'll put that opportunity one more time into the chat, is so that you could go back and look at these later at your own convenience after today's presentation. So what is your career development story as a district or building? Will the knowledge and skills students acquire prepare them for success when they leave? What would your district's educational processes look like if they were achieving their purpose, goals, and expectations for student learning? And how close are they now to that vision? How will you assess how students, parents, and the community perceive both their needs and their assets? And how will you gather perception data from those who are impacted by your educational practices? To what extent does your data allow you to get to know your students individually, deeply, and authentically? When making decisions with your data, do you ask who will benefit from the decisions and who will not? And what can we do to mitigate that gap? In what ways do you include those most likely to face barriers in the decision process? And how does the district or your building ensure that the allocation of resources and the use of resources are aligned to the needs that you've identified through your surveys? These last few questions are super important as we think about equity in the assessment of our career development culture. And we're going to look at a number of these questions more deeply as we go through the hour today. And we'll come back in February at the Power Hour when we're going to look at curricular and co-curricular alignment. So these questions will guide us today and some again in February.
One of the examples we wanted to show in terms of process guide is the KRESA Career Connect has established metrics to assess six goals of our career planning process. As you can see, they're highlighted here in the teal blue color and include those components of the career planning process that we mentioned earlier: self-awareness, option awareness, skill development, career pathway planning, family engagement, and partner engagement. And then there's the different steps below that in terms of what might qualify in terms of how we're measuring the data, getting to our metrics.
Uh-oh.
We also have another example of a data assessment strategy from Hatching Results, which is an organization that works with school counselors and their programs. And you'll see here, it's a student-centered cyclical process, beginning at the top and analyzing data to identify needs and gaps. And then keeping in mind the steps of plan, do, study, and act. It goes through a cycle that leads to reflection for areas of strength to celebrate, and then challenges that might need more intentionality. So data gathering and analysis helps identify those root causes, the interventions, and the strategies to address, and then ending with a final analysis of outcome data and then determining next steps, which may or may not mean going forward. It could mean stopping and reflecting even more. So sometimes data can be overwhelming. I once attended a workshop that said data is not a four-letter word, because sometimes it can seem like that. But thinking about it like Legos can be a real helpful way to see the process that you might go through. This graphic came from Terry Torjinsky, who led a really great session with our KPS counselors last month. And it shows kind of that transformation of a pile of individual pieces of random data into a beautiful and solid set of results that can be used and shared. So we need to remember to include that disaggregation step. It's very important in ensuring that our assessment is meaningful in the end. So one way, as we mentioned, and we talked about the career planning process, one way to start to organize your assessment plan is by aligning it with a career development cycle. So we've already kind of showed you the one under Career Connect, but there's also these two that we're showing. One being from the career development model, and the other is a SOTA model. So they both include the typical core components of a career planning process: so self-awareness, option awareness, decision-making and planning, and action and development of skills. So two additional elements to the career development cycle that are becoming crucial are family engagement and employer engagement. And if you recall, these two elements were part of the Career Connect metric. So now that we've taken some time and reviewed some of those elements of a robust career development culture and the kinds of questions that could inform your assessment, let's look at some tools that can help you answer the assessment questions you might want to prioritize. So earlier today, we've mentioned the MICIP framework to identify and assess an element of your career development culture. So these slides show the various types and levels of data that might be sourced and included in your assessment. So as you can see, the sources include academic, describing how students might have performed on Michigan curriculum standards; non-academic, those things in the areas of nutrition, physical activity, social emotional health, behavioral health, physical environments, family and community engagement, or systems describing how the district performance is in areas of the curriculum or instruction and assessment, technology, transportation, etc. Then there are the different types that are shown, the achievement data, which it relates, of course, to the sources for academic data on the performance of curriculum standards and student retention. Demographic data: age, gender, race, ethnicity, those things that we know. Perception data: the change in attitude, knowledge, and skills of students when learning content, from like a pre-assessment to a post-assessment. The process data that's there that we can look at and utilize, which is the count of how many times a task might have occurred. For example, the number of parent guardian phone calls responded to. We also want to make sure that we are looking at that aggregated data, the high-level district-wide view, as well as the disaggregated individual school data that's right down to the student level if necessary for some of our decisions. So those of you that are fully ingrained and utilizing with MICIP, you know that it encourages the whole child framework, which suggests transitioning from a focus solely on academic achievement to one that promotes the long-term development and success of all children. So if we move beyond academic achievement as the only success marker, how might you combine some of the data points in the whole child frameworks model, the 5 categories, to point towards career net readiness. And what type of time frame comes to mind when you think of long-term development and success? We're looking at it as into adulthood, not just graduation day. So we understand, of course, that healthy, in terms of one of the categories, promotes, being able to attend school in good health and learning healthy lifestyle practices. And safe speaks to learning in a physically and emotionally safe environment for all students as well as staff and all members that come into the building. So how might a culture of career development impact student engagement? One of the other categories, or their feeling of being supported no matter the post-high school pathway they are choosing. And how does the culture of career development challenge students toward their career pursuits and think critically about their local and global communities? So we kind of just picked apart one of the tenets, the challenge tenet of the whole child framework. You can see there's this list of items that are relevant to career readiness. So how have you already, or how could you include these in your culture assessment? We're going to get to that.
So, as Liz has outlined, while we encourage schools to align their career development goals with their MICIP goals, we also wanted to explore today some other ways that you might want to frame or focus your culture assessment. Maybe you'll decide to include data that aligns with the framework recommended by this resource, Preparing Tomorrow's Workforce. Um, we alluded to this in September, and it encourages you to include baseline graduate performance data and local workforce and economic data in building a career development culture. You'll recall that in September we mentioned author Hans Meter, who's a senior fellow for education and workforce development innovation at UScience, and he talks about CCL, career connected learning, and career navigation skills. Here again is his 10 steps for building a career-connected learning system, including that number 4, which stresses the importance of external data like graduate success and regional job outlooks. So Meter suggests using data from the National Student Clearinghouse to find answers to some of the questions you might have about your graduates. Looking at data after high school to see what happens, to see how many of our high school graduates enroll in college, and perhaps more importantly, do they persist and graduate from college? How long does it take for them to get their degrees? What are the outcomes for our economically disadvantaged students? And how well are our K-12 college and career readiness programs working in the long term versus during the time that students are with us until they graduate? Um, and he recommends this tool called the Student Tracker for high schools, which is part of the National Student Clearinghouse. You can click on the graphic here on the slide and actually get to more information about that student tracker that gives K-12 folks the opportunity to add in data that comes from postgraduate pursuits. Meter also suggests that it's really important to include real-time and traditional labor market information, or LMI, in all of our facets of career development programming and assessment. He recognizes that ensuring that our systems and our programs are reflective of the employment opportunities that will exist upon our graduates' exit from the K-12 system is really important to economic success, both of our area and industry and to the individuals in our care. So these 2 data sources from the State of Michigan Center for Data and Analytics should inform your planning and your culture. You can click on the Career Outlook dashboard and be taken to that online resource that'll allow you to do a lot of deep dive digging into what's available for students in your area. You can click on the brochure, the Southwest Michigan Career Career Outlook on the right, and get some of the top high wage, high demand opportunities in our region, and see what it might look like to factor those into any assessment that you do of your career development culture.
Okay, so I know we're putting a lot of links and information, throwing a lot of that information at you throughout this Power Hour. Like I said at the beginning, we have a lot of information to share. And so another way to think about what we need to be assessing is this information that we're starting to dig into and receive from Kevin Fleming, who is the author of this book, Redefining the Goal, which encourages educators to consider how much their institutions are evolving and adapting. And he thinks this is the top priority, saying confidence in education is eroding. And for many students, especially, relevance and knowing purpose isn't being found. So his premise is helping all learners find their purpose on purpose. Within the book, Kevin Fleming points out the 100-year-old metric of calculating learning based on seat time, as if sitting in a chair somehow helps the learner assimilate the content. He encourages schools to use a gap analysis, this particular gap analysis, to identify where their innovation, where they have or have not been adapting new ways of learning. How has it evolved or not? And this analysis comes from a guide that's referenced in his TED Talk. If you'd like to listen to his TED Talk, and I would encourage it, just click on the book cover that's found here on the slide. So yet another way of assessing is this book, Street Data. It helps us look at various levels of data where student agency is the goal, not test scores. So one of the questions asked within is, why do we rely on current forms of data, and what would happen if we simply stopped and embraced a new model? And what if we've been asking the wrong set of questions? So what if the achievement gap itself is a mythology? So what is it that we're measuring, and is it not, and what is measurable is not always the same as what is valuable? And so kind of doing a flip in our minds, or a rethinking, a reframing of our assessing.
So in this street data framework, there are 3 levels of data to consider, and you can see that on the right side of this slide. So satellite data is that large grain size data that illuminates patterns of achievement, equity, teacher quality, and they point in a general direction for future study. Then in the middle, we've got map data. So satellite way up high in the sky, right? We're coming down towards the ground. We get down to map level data, which is sort of medium-sized data that helps identify specific student or instructional skill gaps. And what the authors of Street Data are really encouraging us to do is not neglect that third level, that close to the street, that on the ground level of data, fine grain data that helps us understand students, staff, and parent perspectives. Some of that qualitative data allowing us to assess our culture using that 360-degree feedback that we talked about earlier. So from those 3 levels of data, and traditionally our education system is much better at looking at the satellite level and maybe the map level. But these authors are encouraging us to include in any cultural assessment that street level data. And so they give us this framework on the left for how to do that. Um, in part 1 of the book and the framework, they offer ways for us to understand why using this street level data can really allow us to get at equity issues in our programming and our culture. Then part 2 on the top, they help us understand what street data is and how we can leverage it for equity. In part three, they look at how street data can not only help us with equity questions, but it also can transform the way learning happens. And in part four, we understand how street data can transform school culture and build that momentum for equity. So to me, it seems like this concept of street data is especially relevant and exciting when we think about a career development culture where we're seeking to transform learning to better prepare all of our students for future success, however each individual one of our students defines success for themselves. Oops. So there's another way, yet another way to think about how we frame this question of assessing the culture. Maybe what you want to focus on in your assessment is really skills and competencies that learning of which are embedded K-12 in your system. The street data folks will certainly tell us that academic grades assess only some of the skills and competencies that graduates will need for future success. And we know that Xello gives learners the option of self-assessing their skills and considering which skills they want or need to develop further. But we wanted to share a resource from Advanced CTE, a nonprofit that represents state career and technical education directors and leaders. And this organization has developed a set of career-ready practices that might lend yet another good lens to your culture assessment. Maybe some of you have seen this before, the 12 career-ready practices um, that represent general professional skills that are sought by industry and that represent skills that are needed to succeed in the workplace today. And here you can see leadership, communication, resiliency, time management, personal and professional financial literacy, and career navigation, among others, all listed as skills that we could be assessing and including in the way that we think about our career development culture. If you like that set of general professional skills, you'll appreciate this one too from the Educational Testing Service. They have created a report called A New Vision for Skills-Based Assessment. It's linked to the left graphic on this slide, and it shows the direction that they are headed in terms of competency-based assessment. So this table is kind of cool because it shows a number of different frameworks from different organizations and institutions, but they come up with a lot of the same kinds of skills and competencies that are needed for graduates today to be successful in their postgraduate pursuits. It's a lot. So we, again, invite you to return to that opportunity to review these later on because you might be as excited as I am to see that not only do we have major skills that are defined by organizations in this country, but you can see what Europe, Saudi Arabia, India, and others are thinking about as they think about global skills and competencies. I'll also note that KRESA's own Career Connect campus has a Skills for Success module that focuses on 5 of the skills that you see repeated over and over here: collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, self-management, and communication. So in the same report that you can get to from these slides, there also is this set of skills for the future, right? So the ETS and the Carnegie Institute took it upon themselves not only to assess what are the skills that graduates need today, but what are the skills that they will need moving forward into the future? And so this might prove useful as your institution considers how to assess skills and competencies, not only for today, but for the future. Some of these that really interested me were things like the skill of empathy, systems thinking, sense making, and what they call transformative competencies. You can see that in the bottom right. Um, how could you fold these increasingly important skills into your career development culture and then make sure that you are checking in on how these skills are being cultivated in your learners?
Okay, and we've mentioned Xello a couple times in earlier slides, and we know, all of you know that KRESA supports the Xello Career and Academic Planning platform for all students, all educators, and families. And they can use that to explore and reflect on and plan their future. I wanted to just highlight some of the use of Xello data. We've highlighted that in our previous Power Hours. So just here doing a quick review of this tool, specifically the reporting tool in Xello for assessment of your culture. Since it's just really rich with data, the more your students are on it and using it, the more data you'll be able to find and mine within it. So as I mentioned earlier, it is it's one of the templates that was developed during the Michigan Career Development Model updates. And it is linked within the MICIP templates for school improvement teams for their use. One of the templates, one of the areas that could be very beneficial, perhaps, for your building your culture of career development is some of the different reports. The one shown here is the plans and goals. So there's many reports within Xello and ways to filter those reports. And that's a whole training for another day. We're not going to go into that one. But of course, for today, just showing reports that you might find helpful. Within this goals and plans, if having every student who's graduating, having every student to graduate with a career plan is something you're thinking should be included in building your culture of career development, you can easily track that through these reports in terms of who does or who doesn't have a plan within the Xello, who has utilized this feature to create their plan. It's located in the report section under student work on your educator dashboard, and we actually have a goal within our metrics to increase the number of students who have a career plan within some of our teams and groups that are working with students, specifically within our Career Connect campus and some of our other programming that we have here on the Discover team that Joan and I are part of. So there's other reports as well under student work, things like personality styles, learning styles, saved skills, saved interests. And each of them typically give a chart of the top 5 items for each of those reports. And of course, you can use this data to analyze your district course offerings, extracurricular offerings, perhaps guide some professional development for staff, or to provide services for students. So guiding questions might include things like, is our district meeting the learning styles of our students? Are our course offerings addressing student interests? Is there a gap between the top skills or interests and the projected job openings in our region or career goals of our students? And if so, how do we bridge that gap? Is more education needed as part of the legislative EBP process to address student data and/or gaps? So some of these things we can get to from that data that's within Xello through their reports. So quickly, this chart shows the top 5 saved careers, and it often receives groans because of the high number of students saving professional athlete as a career. I pulled this off of our regional data dashboard just recently. So you can see the professional athlete is right up there at the top. So we know that student interest and skills typically model what they are exposed to. So then the question becomes, how might exposing students to other careers or even careers associated with professional sports change this graphic? And something to note too is that these reports are most accurate when students are encouraged to review their Xello interests, personality, and skill assessments annually. because things change for kids from when they might first take these assessments in middle school to when they're embedded in their high school courses and marching towards graduation. So really, that interest in professional athlete might wane a little bit from middle school to high school. So when we look at these 5 saved careers, and keeping those in mind, the professional athlete, the actor, artist, video game development, and animator, let's look at how that compares to the projected job openings report and Michigan's Hot 50. Joan alluded to the brochure earlier. This is what the inside of the brochure looks like. So it's Michigan's Hot 50 through 2032. And when you look at it, it's it's a little bit hard to see in the screen, but if you follow the link, you'll be able to see it more clearly when you have a chance to do that. But the top 5 on this list are general operations and managers, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers, registered nurses, accountants and auditors, and market research analysts and marketing specialists. So when we compare this list of the Hot 50 for Michigan and look at it against what our data is in Xello, we can certainly do some comparisons and see some of the gaps perhaps, and what additional information or information about career areas we might want to expose students to. Maybe through classroom conversations or posters, maybe through career fairs, guest speakers, or industry tours. Within the MCDM, the slogan is, they can't be what they can't see.
So, phew, we've looked at a lot of different frameworks, ideas, lenses through which you might want to assess your career development culture, hoping to give you a sense of the breadth of possibility for your own cultural assessment. And we wanted to highlight one particular example, and that comes from our colleagues at Youth Solutions, who have a pretty comprehensive framework, as shown here. There are schools in our county who have gone through the Youth Solutions Foundations process, and they have immersed themselves in assessing these 5 focus areas: awareness and culture building, direct student services, communication and messaging, logistical support, and assessment and data collection. Um, and so while the complete assessment framework isn't currently available to additional schools, it's really worth looking more deeply at some of the valuable framing that Youth Solutions has already provided to some of the schools in our ISD. And by the end of today, you'll see how this list in front of you now aligns with the categories in our own career development culture assessment tool that we'll share in a few minutes. So here's some of the questions that districts who have worked with Youth Solutions have asked themselves in that first category of awareness and culture building, just as information for you to consider. And as you assess your own career development culture, maybe you'll want to ask some of these questions. Are your stakeholders aware of the MCDM and the legislative requirements? Does leadership as well as staff, are they aware of and involved in the career development program in your building or district? Are families and community members aware of and involved in your career development program? And does the culture exist that promotes graduation and post-secondary educational attainment? We've mentioned process, perception, and outcome data already. I just wanted to show you how Youth Solutions describes these 3 types of data in their assessment framework. And that's another piece that you can come back and take a look at when you review this slide deck after today. But as part of the Youth Solutions Continuous Improvement Toolkit, students look at these bits of process data on the screen. And I'm going to guess that you'll look at this list and you'll see that most of you already collect and analyze most of these data points as well. So the point of this slide is kind of to say we do a good job already at collecting process data, and maybe what we need to do to get to a more comprehensive analysis of our career development culture is to do a little addition of some perception data. So I wanted to give you just a couple of examples that are pulled from the Youth Solutions Foundation's framework of survey questions that they use to try to get at this perception data, and to show you how valuable it might be to think about how questions that you ask could simultaneously get at the student and the staff and the family perceptions. So I don't know how often you survey simultaneously for the perceptions of different stakeholders like this, but here's one example of one easy way to do it. So ask a student. I believe it's important to think about and plan for my future, and then they rate that. Ask your staff. I believe it's important for students to think about and plan for the future. And ask your families the same question about their students. Here's another example of how you might assess the perceptions of various stakeholders about key elements of your culture. Um, Again, you can ask students and staff and families about EDPs and the role that EDPs play in the students, your students, their students, planning for the future. And here's a handful of other examples of things that you might want to think about assessing, perceptions that you might want to get at, especially from the students in your building or district. Um, do you want to find out how students, if they understand how their interests, skills, and talents relate to options? Do they know how to ask for help? Do they have someone, a mentor, a family member who helps them plan for the future? Again, getting back to that labor market data, I know what the fastest growing job markets are in Michigan. And that self-efficacy, I've researched a variety of career options in my interest areas.
So we wanted to make sure that you had a takeaway from today's Power Hour, something that perhaps you might be able to adapt, utilize. And so after reviewing the types of assessments, the buckets of data, the varieties of goals and metrics, we've created a survey that can serve as a tool for a building or a district staff to assess its career development culture as a baseline that can identify the gaps and priorities. Knowing that a culture is based on shared values and expectations, actions and relationships, our survey asks questions that focus on these areas. And so on this slide on the left are the overarching questions we ask in our cultural survey: what's believed, what's seen, what's expected, what's done, and what's nurtured. And on the right, that's cross-referenced the types of data from the assessments we've looked at today in terms of the data from MICIP or Youth Solutions, our Career Connect metrics, et cetera. So looking into our survey, we've created radio buttons with the options. We developed an answer scale, and in a few minutes, we're going to kind of walk you through some of what our questions are. And then at the end, we'll give you a link to the survey. But the radio buttons are embedded in terms of when the answers, there's demonstrated intentional and persuasive use of this practice, or it's considerable. Maybe it's partial at this point. Perhaps it's just been initiated, and it could just simply be absent because we're just getting started. So in the what's believed section, it helps define the common understanding of career readiness. Does everybody have that same thought of what career readiness is? And as you can see from the questions in this section, it's not about career readiness as it relates to college readiness. but rather how it relates to lifelong learning about self and options, and career opportunities as they present themselves over a lifetime. So the what's seen section is in terms of the messaging that students are seeing on a daily basis from the walls of your buildings. What are they being exposed to? So in looking at the questions, maybe needing to add to the collection of hallway messaging, using ideas and suggestions in these bullets on the slide here that help create that culture of career development as students continually walk the halls. What posters might need to be added? What other messaging might need to be there? And then what's expected is it one department of individuals that is providing all of the career development information and pieces, or is it the entire school and community? So within the questions in this section, we look at how everyone contributes to that culture of career development: students, staff, families, community, etc. And then what's done? So what's done looks at what encouragements occur that promote critical thinking, from information explored and received about career pathways to plans and actions of next steps. So the questions here is, in what ways are all opportunities promoted to all students versus a select number of students receiving certain amounts of information while others receive different types of information or have access to various opportunities? How do we make it an all approach? And then what's nurtured? It speaks to that whole child framework that we presented earlier. The focus is not just on academics or academic achievement, but on the whole child, all those different pieces, those different categories we talked about. So then the questions there are, how do we celebrate whatever career pathway a student might be choosing from the exploration and research that they've done, and how they've been helped along the way by everyone. So we want to kind of looking at eliminating that word just. A lot of times we hear, I'm just going on to a job, or I'm just going to a community college. We want to celebrate all pathway choices. So we promised that we would provide the link to this survey so that you might be able to, if you choose to use it. We also wanted to kind of share what the questions are so that you can see what the format of the survey is and the questions of that, in case you would like to adapt some of those for your own uses. So the form, it's linked here. It'll ask for your email and school information, just because we're wanting to keep our own data, track our own data. So it'll ask you if you anticipate using the survey, and acknowledge that we might reach out here and there periodically for updates. So we hope it's exciting for you, and maybe will be used within your school building.
Great. And I'll just hop in and add that we purposefully walked through lots and lots of different elements of assessing your career development culture before getting to the point of sharing this tool, because we recognize that it really is just one piece of an overall culture assessment. We wanted you to ask yourself the questions that we've posed throughout this hour together. We wanted you to think about, for my building, for my district, which of these approaches makes the most sense? Which of these types of cultural assessment is going to be the most meaningful as we think about what our goals are in our building and our district. So again, we gave you so many different rich opportunities, and we're finishing with this very specific culture survey because we wanted you to have at least a place to start. But when you click the link, you'll be asked to make a copy of the survey, and that will allow you then to add questions. What I hope you'll do is kind of cross-reference this hour of information and maybe go back to some of the questions that we asked earlier that you might want to check in with your staff on. Maybe you use the same format to create a version of a survey that you would offer to your learners, or to your families, or however you decide makes the most sense for you. But we wanted to at least give you something to start from, and we also wanted to give you the freedom and flexibility to create the tool that works the most for your building and your district. So that's sort of the rationale behind what we've done until this point. But as Liz mentioned, you can capture the link to the survey in the QR code there, or if you have the slide deck, you can click on the link there to get your own copy of the form that we just went through.
Mhm.
So now that we've got you thinking about all the ways that you can access the career development, assess the career development culture in your building or in your district, we did want to let you know about an upcoming webinar that might be useful for one teeny tiny component of your culture assessment. And that is this Xello webinar coming up next week on reporting that's specifically designed for teachers and counselors. You can get to the webinar link from the QR code here. And I think that if you have the deck and you click on the QR code, it'll also take you to the link there. We wanted to make sure that you were aware that you can actually register for this. And if the timing doesn't work for you, if noon on next Tuesday is not a good time, once you register for the webinar, you will afterwards, even if you don't attend, receive a recording of the webinar that you can watch at your convenience. And maybe this is the time too to remind you of the extensive Xello support site that will eventually also include the link to this webinar, along with just dozens and dozens of reports and webinars and frameworks that can also support you as you work on this assessment of your culture.
Mhm.
So as we start to wrap up today, we did want to remind you that we are in the middle of our year-long series of Power Hours. At the top of the screen, you can see what we've done already this year. But next month, on February 25th, we are excited to offer this opportunity to think about how you map your curriculum and your co-curricular activities, K-12, to build towards that career development program and culture that's comprehensive and embedded and meets the definition that we showed at the beginning of our hour today. You can always watch the past Power Hours on our YouTube channel, which you can get to by clicking on the link in the bottom corner of this screen, or just by going to KRESA's Power Hours. You could get there pretty easily. I do see that there's a question in the chat about earning career sketches for watching past Power Hours. We love that question. We are asking that question too. And I guess, Melissa, I would say stay tuned. That is under consideration at this point, and it may be something that we circle back to.
Mhm.
And with that, we are wrapping up at just about time. We wanted to make sure that you were able to um, reach either Liz or me if you have questions afterwards. So you'll see that our email addresses are there for your use. I am going to drop in the chat right now the links where you can both sign out for sketches. So you signed in at the beginning of this hour. If you would please also click and sign out, that helps us document the fact that you have been with us for an hour. And you also can click the other link I just put in the chat to register for any of those upcoming power hours that are remaining this year. We have certainly appreciated having you with us today, and we wish you a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you all for tuning in. As Joan said, we certainly appreciate it. We know we covered a lot of information. We hope that you found it helpful and that there's some resources that you'll be able to utilize. And most importantly, we hope to see you on the next Power Hour. Thank you.